She stood on my porch with the whole storm at her back, a bundle held in each arm, and she did not ask me for charity. She asked for work. One night, she said, just one night's work, and she'd be gone before the sun found the ridge, rain coming off her braid in a thin silver rope. Two small faces turned up out of the blankets, watching me the way animals watch a man they haven't decided about yet. I've spent a long time trying to forget what I said to her in that doorway, and a longer time trying to forget what came after. If you have ever been so low that pride was the last thing left in your pockets, if you've ever knocked on a stranger's door knowing they'd every right to shut it in your face, then stay with me a while. Because this is the story of the night I opened my door to a woman I'd been raised to fear. And the morning I finally understood which one of us had come to the other for saving. The knock came 3 times before I believed it was a knock, and not the wind trying its luck against my door. I'd been sitting where I always sat when the weather turned mean, in the good chair by the stove, the one Della used to say was too fine to waste on a man who never washed. Boone was stretched flat at my boots, that old blue dog, twitching through some dream of cattle he was too stiff to chase anymore. The lamp was low. I had my tally book open on my knee, though I wasn't writing in it. I just liked the look of the columns some nights. Numbers keep their promises. You add them up the same way every time, and they never once surprise you or leave you. There's a comfort in a thing that behaves. Then 3 knocks, slow, weak almost, like whoever it was had used up most of what they had just getting to the porch. Boone's head came up. Easy, I told him, though my own heart had jumped a rib. Nobody comes to a ranch 9 miles from town at that hour with good news riding in front of them. I've buried enough of my life to know that a knock after dark is either a man in trouble or a man bringing it. I took the shotgun from over the door. I want to be honest about that because I've turned this night over so many times in the years since, and I won't dress it up prettier than it was. I took the gun. I was afraid. And when I cracked the door against the storm and the lamplight fell across the porch and found her standing there, I'll tell you the truth of what I felt in that first half-second before I felt anything better. I felt fear, and I felt it as anger because that's the coward's trick the heart plays. She was Apache. In that country in that year, those 2 things, a knock in the dark and an Apache at the door, were the beginning of stories that ended with widows. She saw the gun. Of course she did. Her eyes went to it and stayed there a moment level, and then came back up to my face, and she did not flinch, and she did not run, and she did not do a single one of the things a frightened person does. She just waited for me to decide what kind of man I was going to be. The rain was coming sideways off the eave, hammering the yard to soup. She had a blanket over her head and shoulders, army wool by the look of it, worn to the weave. Under it she held 2 children, one in the crook of each arm, wrapped so tight against the cold that all I could see of them were 2 round faces and 4 dark eyes. One of them was crying, thin and hopeless, the kind of crying a child does when it has already learned that crying doesn't fix anything and just can't stop anyway. "I only need 1 night's work," she said. Her English was careful, placed, like she'd rehearsed the words on the long walk-in so they'd come out clean and give me no reason to shut the door. "1 night," she said again. "I will work anything. I ask no charity from you. Only let me earn food for them and shelter until the storm passes, and I am gone at first light. You will not see me again." I stood there with the gun in my hands and the cold spilling past me into the house, and I could not, for the length of 3 heartbeats, make my mouth work. Here is what I want you to understand about me before I tell you what I did. I was not a good man in those days. I was not a bad one either, but I'd let the good in me go untended so long it had gone to weeds. Della had been 3 years in the ground on the hill behind the barn. The boy we'd buried beside her had been there 4. Between the 2 of them, they'd taken most of what was worth saving in me and left the rest to rattle around a house built for a family it no longer had. I ran cattle because I didn't know how to stop. I kept my tally book because counting was the one thing left that made a kind of sense. I talked to the dog because he was the only living thing that would still stand to listen. So when I say I nearly shut the door, I want you to know it wasn't cruelty. It was smaller and more forgivable and worse than cruelty. It was habit. I had gotten used to keeping the world out. A closed door had become the natural shape of my life. The crying child hiccuped and went quiet against her shoulder, and in the sudden gap I heard the other one, a boy, I'd learned, say something to his mother in a small voice in their tongue, and she answered him low without ever taking her eyes off me. 2 words. I didn't know their meaning. But I knew the shape of them. because Della used to say things in that exact shape to our boy when he woke from the croup and couldn't breathe and was scared. And there is a tone a mother uses that runs underneath every language on this earth, and it went into me like a splinter you don't feel go in but feel every hour after. We're almost there, hold on. I lowered the gun. Getting out of the rain, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant. You're letting the cold in. I have done a few things in my life I'm not ashamed of. Standing aside from that door is near the top of a short list. She came in quick and quiet, the way a person moves who has learned that welcomes can be taken back. She stopped just inside and looked around my kitchen, the cold stove I'd let die down, the one plate on the table, the general air of a place where nobody bothered to be alive, and I saw her take a fast accounting of it, same as I'd taken of her. Then she set the children down by the stove, unwrapped them enough to free their arms, and turned to me and said, "You have wood needs splitting. I saw the pile. I will split it." "It's midnight and it's coming a flood," I said. "Then I will do inside work." She'd already spotted the sink, the crusted pots I'd been meaning to see to since roughly the last presidency. "This, and you have not swept, and the children can sit where they are and touch nothing. They are good. They know how to be still." I looked at the two of them. They'd gone quiet and enormous-eyed in the warmth, staring at Boone, who had heaved himself up and gone over to investigate, and was now standing there getting his ears examined by two very small hands with the patient, long-suffering dignity of an old dog who has decided this is fine. The girl was the crier. Her cheeks were still wet and shining. The boy had one hand knotted in the back of his sister's dress like he'd been holding on to her the whole way through the storm and hadn't thought to let go yet. "Sit down," I said to their mother. "You're not scrubbing my pots at midnight. I'm not so far gone I'll make a woman work for a meal in the middle of the night." Something crossed her face then, quick, gone before I could name it. Not gratitude, closer to a wound. And she said, with a flatness that I understood better later, "I would rather work." And I understood. God help me, I understood that completely. Because I would rather work, too. Work is what you do when sitting still would leave too much room for the things that hurt. Work is a wall you build against yourself. I'd been hiding behind mine for 3 years. So I didn't argue. I put the kettle on. I got down the good tin of coffee I'd been saving for no reason a man could name, and I cut bread. And I found the end of a ham I'd been rationing. And I fried it in the pan while she, because she would not simply sit and be a guest, would not accept the shape of guest, took a rag and began wiping down my table, slow and thorough, and told her children in their soft tongue to mind the dog and not the meat. And the whole while the rain came down on the roof like it had a grudge, and my kitchen, for the first time in 3 years, had the sound of more than one person breathing in it. I set the food in front of the children first. I don't know why, I hadn't planned to. But when the plate was ready, my hands carried it to the two of them by the stove before they carried it anywhere else, and the girl looked up at me, and then at her mother, asking, and the mother gave a small nod, and the child took a piece of ham in her fist and ate it with a concentration that broke something in my chest, because a child does not eat like that unless there have been days behind it that were not like this one. The boy waited until his sister had 2 pieces before he'd take his own. 3 years old, maybe 4, and already keeping accounts. Already making sure his sister ate first. I have counted a great many things in my life, and I have never seen a tally kept as carefully as that boy kept his sister's supper against his own hunger. Their mother watched them eat and did not eat. "You," I said, and pushed the second plate across the table toward her. "Sit, eat. The work can wait for daylight, and there'll be plenty of it, and I'll take it out of you honest, don't worry. But nobody in this house is scrubbing anything on an empty belly. That's the rule. It's a new rule. I just made it, but it's a rule." For a moment she didn't move. Pride is a strange animal. I've had years to think on it. Pride is sometimes the only thing a person has left standing after everything else has been taken, and you have to be careful how you go about relieving them of it, because to a person with nothing else, pride is not vanity, it's structure. It's the last beam holding the roof up. Take it wrong and the whole thing comes down. I saw her decide to trust that I understood that. She sat, she ate. Slowly at first, then not slowly. And I turned away and busied myself with the coffee so she could do it without being watched, because there is a dignity in being unlooked at, and it was the only gift I had to give her that she couldn't refuse. Her name was Nolly. She told me over the coffee, after the children had fallen asleep against Boone in a pile so sudden and complete it was almost comic. 1 minute 2 watchful little faces, the next 2 soft heaps of breathing, the boy's hand still fisted in his sister's dress even in sleep. Nolly. She said it plainly, and then said the settler name the fort had put on her paper, which was Anna, and the way she said Anna had a distance in it, like it was a coat somebody else had made her wear. Nolly, I said, trying it, that's the one I'll use if it's all right. She looked at me a moment, surprised, and I couldn't tell if I'd done right or wrong until she gave the smallest nod. It is all right. I didn't press her that first night for the whole of it. You don't. But over the coffee in the low lamp with the storm easing off the roof, some of it came anyway, in pieces, the way the truth comes when a person is too tired to guard it. Her husband was dead. I gathered it had been soldiers, and I gathered she wasn't going to say more, and I didn't ask. Her people had been moved. I knew what moved meant. Everyone in that country knew, though we said it politely like it was a thing done to furniture, moved south to a reservation whose name I knew and whose reputation I knew better. A place where the water was bad and the rations were worse and thin. She'd started out for it with the twins because there was nowhere else. And somewhere on that road, she'd done the arithmetic that any mother does, the arithmetic I'd watched her boy doing over the ham, and she'd understood that the twins would not live to reach the place that was supposed to keep them alive. So she'd left the road, and she'd been 3 weeks working her way through ranch country, offering the only thing she had left to offer, which was her 2 hands and her willingness to use them until they bled, in exchange for enough to keep 2 children breathing one more day. Some had fed her. Some had set dogs on her. One had done worse, and I saw the ghost of it cross her face, and I did not ask. Why keep going? I said. It came out of me before I could stop it, and I was ashamed of it the second it landed. I mean 3 weeks, that road, why not? Why not give up was what the sentence wanted to be, and I heard how it sounded and let it die. But she answered it anyway. She looked over at the 2 of them asleep against my dog in the lamplight, and she said, "Because they are not finished." That was all. They are not finished. Not because I love them, though she did, you could see it in the marrow of her. Not because it's my duty. Because they were not finished. Because their story wasn't done being told, and she would be damned before she'd let the world close the book early on account of it not caring for the ending. I have thought about those 3 words more than I have thought about almost anything. I looked at my tally book, sitting closed on the table between us. All those columns, all those neat sums. I had spent 3 years reducing my life to figures because figures don't grieve and don't hope and don't require anything of you. And here was a woman who had walked 300 miles on a sum that would never balance, 2 children who ate more than she could earn, a road that led nowhere she could survive. And she'd kept walking anyway, because she'd refused to accept that the numbers were the whole of the truth. "There's a room," I said. She looked at me. "Off the kitchen, it was," I stopped, started again. "It's got a bed in it, it's dry. The children can have the bed, you take the pallet or the bed, I don't care, it's yours for the night. And in the morning, I found I had to work at this part. In the morning, before you decide anything, we'll talk. There's more work on this place than one man's been keeping up with. That's the honest truth and not charity. I've been letting it go. If you wanted to earn your way a few days while I studied on it, that'd be a fair trade and no favor to either of us. I'm not saying stay. I'm saying we'll talk. In the daylight, when we're neither of us so tired we can't think." I don't know what I expected. Tears, maybe, or that flat pride again. What I got was worse and better than either. She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't read, and then she said very quietly, "Why?" And I understood the question. It wasn't "Why are you being kind?" It was older and harder than that. It was, "What does this cost me? What do you want?" Because every door that has opened for me on this road has wanted something, and I need to know the price before I let my children sleep behind it. I thought about lying, saying something noble. Instead, I told her the truth, because she'd earned it, and because I was too tired to be anything but true. "Because it's been 3 years since anybody ate at that table but me," I said. "And I'd forgotten what it sounded like, and I find I don't want to forget it again quite so soon." She held my eyes. Then she nodded once and looked away, and I saw her throat move, and I had the grace, at least, to get up and make a lot of noise banking the stove so that whatever she did with her face in that moment, she got to do it unlooked at. That was the first night. I lay awake in my own bed a long while, listening to the small, unfamiliar sounds of a house that had people in it again. The creak of the room off the kitchen. A child murmuring in sleep, Boone's tail thumping the floor once at some dream. And I found the tally book had followed me to the nightstand out of pure habit, and I opened it, and I did not know what to write. Because there was no column for what had happened. There was no line in all my neat accounts for a woman standing in a storm refusing to beg, or for a boy keeping his sister's supper before his own, or for the particular sound a house makes when it is no longer only holding one man and his grief. I closed the book. Somewhere out past the ridge the storm was moving off east, taking its noise with it, and in the new quiet I heard it faint from the room off the kitchen, so soft I might have dreamed it. Nolly singing, low, 2 notes over and over in her own tongue. The kind of song a mother sings not to be heard but to hold 2 frightened children on the far side of sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to a stranger sing to her babies in a language I would never understand, in the house my wife had died in. And for the first time since I'd filled in the last hole on that hill behind the barn, I did not feel like the only ghost left in the place. I told myself it was for one night. I want you to remember that I told myself that. Because I am going to tell you what came next, the neighbor who saw her at my well 3 days on, and the word that got to town, and the man who rode up my road with a paper and a badge and a claim, and the morning I had to stand between my own front door and the whole weight of everything I'd been raised to be. But that first night, I told myself it was one night's work and no more, and I believed it the way you believe a thing you need to be true. I was wrong, of course. Thank God I was wrong. One night became 4 before either of us said a word about it. That's how it happens. Not with a decisions I could have argued with. I was good at arguing myself out of anything by then. It happened in smaller currency than that. It happened because on the second morning I woke to the smell of the stove already going and coffee already made, and I came out to find Nolly had been up since before light and had the corral gate rehung, the one I'd been meaning to fix since Della was alive, the one that dragged and screeched and I'd stopped even hearing any more the way you stop hearing your own troubles. She'd taken it off its pins, planed the bottom rail down with my drawknife, and rehung it so it swung sweet and silent as a whisper. I stood there in the doorway watching it swing, and I did not have one single word. It needed doing, she said, not looking up from the harness she'd already moved on to mending. The screech. It would wake the dead. It nearly did, I thought, and did not say, because the dead in question were on the hill, and I did not joke about them, even to myself. The twins were out by the woodpile in the thin morning sun. The girl, Dolly, I'd learned her name by then, and the boy was Kai. The girl had appointed herself Boone's personal keeper, and was gravely feeding him bits of something she'd saved from breakfast, one at a time, with a ceremony you'd think was feeding a king. The boy was stacking kindling. Actually stacking it in a real pile, small pieces his small arms could manage, arranging them with the same careful account-keeping I'd seen in him over the ham. A 3-year-old working, not playing at work. Working because in his short life he'd learned that a body earned its place, and he wasn't going to be the one who didn't pull his weight even if his weight was 4 sticks of kindling at a time. I watched him a while. Then I went and got the wood splitting done that I'd been putting off, and I made a point of setting the smallest, lightest, most useless splinters aside in their own little pile. And when Kai came over to inspect my work with his solemn eyes, I said, "That pile there's the tricky ones. Special job. Reckon you're the man for it." He looked at the pile, he looked at me. He did not smile. I'd not seen him smile yet, either of them. They'd both had smiles frightened out of them somewhere back on that road. But he gave a short nod, exactly like his mother's, and set to it. And I turned back to my splitting so he could do his work unlooked at, which was the only true kindness I'd figured out how to give in this life. By the 3rd day, I'd stopped saying one night's work even in my own head. Here's a thing I've noticed about people, having lived a while now and watched a good number of them. Everyone will tell you they judge a man by his character and not his skin. Everyone believes it about themselves. And then a wagon comes up the road. Ezra Coombs had the spread north of mine. Not a cruel man, understand? That's the part that's hard to explain to people who weren't there. Not a monster. He'd have given you the shirt off his back if your house burned. He'd sat up 2 nights with me when Della was dying, and I have never forgotten it and never will. A decent man. That's what makes it worth telling, because it wasn't monsters that made that country dangerous for a woman like Nolly. It was decent men who'd had one true thing about the world taught wrong to them. So early they mistook it for the shape of their own conscience. He came up my road the 4th morning to return a post-hole digger, and he saw her at the well. I watched it happen from the barn, watched him rein up. Watched his easy neighbor's face do a thing I'd seen faces do my whole life and had never once, until that morning, felt sick to my stomach watching. Watched Nolly see him seeing her and go still, and lower her eyes, not from shame. I knew her better than that by then, but from arithmetic. Calculating. Deciding how much of herself to make small so as to get her children through the next 5 minutes alive. I came out of the barn fast. "Ezra," I said, too loud, too friendly. "That the digger said it by the barn, I'm obliged." He didn't look at me, he was still looking at her. "Sela's," he said slowly. "Didn't know you took on help." "Housekeeper," I said. "Cook. Got tired of my own burnt beans." "Aha." He looked at the twins, who'd frozen the way children freeze, sensing the change in the air the way animals do. He looked back at me, and there was no meanness in his face, and that was the worst of it. There was concern. He was worried for me. "Sela's, you know what she is. And I want to tell you that I said something fine. That I stood tall and gave him a speech about the brotherhood of man that sent him home ashamed. I didn't. I was a coward that morning, in a small way, in the way that's so easy you don't even see yourself do it. I said, 'She works cheap and she works hard, Ezra, and it's my roof.'" He nodded slow, like I'd confirmed something. "Long as that's all it is." He set the digger down. He gathered his reins. "And then decent man, remember, sat up 2 nights with me while my wife died." He leaned down and said, low, like he was doing me a kindness, "Word gets around, Sela's. Man's got to think about how a thing looks. There's folks in town wouldn't take it so easy as me." And he rode off. Man's got to think about how a thing looks. I stood in my yard with that sentence sitting in me like a swallowed stone, and I looked over at Nolly, who had gone back to drawing water, her back straight, pretending with every line of her body that she hadn't heard, giving me the gift of unlooking so I could stand there and feel my shame in private. Same gift I'd given her. She'd learned my language of kindness quick, or maybe she'd always spoken it, and I was the one just learning. That night, I got out the tally book for the first time since she'd come. I'd meant to work out her wages proper. Make it real, make it right, put it in columns where it made sense. I sat at the table after the children were down, and I opened to a clean page, and I wrote her name at the top, Nolly, and under it I meant to put down what I owed her. 4 days' work, the corral gate, the harness, the coffee she made better than I ever had, the sound of a house that breathed. I sat there an hour. I didn't write a number. There wasn't one. That was the whole trouble. There has never been a column wide enough for what that woman was worth, and I'd spent my life believing everything could be tallied. And I sat at my own table at midnight and finally understood that the most important things in a life are exactly the ones that won't go into the book. I wrote one line under her name. I still have the page. It says, "Owe her more than I've got, pay what I can." Then I closed the book, and I did not open it again for a long time. The days got warm and then warmer. Spring came up the valley the way it does, all at once, the whole country going green overnight like it had been holding its breath. And a strange thing happened, which I've never fully known how to say, so I'll just say it plain. I got happy. Not all at once and not without guilt about it. Every good morning felt like a small betrayal of the two on the hill. And it took me a long time to understand that Della, who had been the kindest person I ever knew, would have been ashamed of me for grieving her by refusing to live. But it came, the happiness. It came in the sound of Dolly finally laughing. A real laugh, startled out of her the day Boone rolled over and knocked her flat in the grass, and then washed her face with apology while she shrieked and giggled and beat on him with her tiny fists. First time I'd heard either of those children laugh. I had to go into the barn a minute after that one. It came in Kai, who had started following me at chores like a small, serious shadow, and who one evening, watching me curry the roan, asked me in his careful English. He'd been learning it off me the way I was learning scraps of theirs off them. "Why you talk to the horse?" "Company," I said. He thought about that. Then he said, "You talk to the dog and the horse." And he pointed at my tally book on the porch rail, the book. "Man's got to talk to somebody." "Now you talk to us," he said. Just an observation. Just a boy noticing a thing. And then he went back to watching the horse and did not see what his sentence did to me. "Now you talk to us." It came in Nolly, most of all, though, that I'm slower to speak of, because it wasn't a thing with a name yet, and I'll not put a bigger word on it than it had earned by then. But we'd taken to sitting on the porch in the evenings after the children slept, not always talking, the two of us and the dog, and the dark coming down over the ridge. And she'd started telling me things about her people, her husband, the girl she'd been before the world got hard. And I'd told her about Della and about the boy, and I'd said his name out loud for the first time in 3 years, which I hadn't been able to do, not even to the dog. His name was Thomas. Saying it to her didn't break me the way I'd feared. It did the other thing. It let some of the pressure off, the way you loosen a girth at the end of a long day, and the horse lets out a breath it's been holding for miles. One of those nights, she said, out of a long, comfortable quiet, "You are a good man, Silas." And I said, "No, I'm a man who got given a second chance at being one and had the sense not to slam the door on it. That's all. That's not the same thing, and I won't take credit I didn't earn." She was quiet a while. Then she said, so soft I nearly missed it, "It is the same thing. Being good is not what you are born. It is the door every time. It is only ever the door. I've turned that over as many times as I've turned over they are not finished." I think she was right. I think that's the whole of it near enough. Goodness isn't a thing you have. It's a thing you do, over and over, one door at a time. And most of the doors are small and nobody sees you open them. And the one that counts is always the one it would be easiest to keep shut. I fell asleep happy that night. I want that on the record. I want you to know there was a stretch of days, 3 or 4 weeks of them, where 4 broken people and an old dog made something in that ranch house that was so close to a family that the distance didn't signify. I want you to know we had that. Because of what came up the road on a Tuesday morning in the 2nd week of April, I need it known that we had that first. They came in the late morning, 3 riders and a wagon. I saw the dust first, a long way off, and I knew before I could make out a face that it was trouble, because good news doesn't travel in a group. Nolly saw it a half-second after I did. She'd got a way of watching the road that I understood now, the watchfulness of the hunted, and she went very still by the wash line. And then she moved, fast and quiet, gathering the twins in from the yard, herding them toward the house without a wasted motion. "Silas," she said, "just my name." But there was a question in it, and I heard the whole of the question, which was, "Is this the door you'll keep open or the one you'll shut?" The riders came into the yard. 2 I didn't know, hard men, hired-looking. The third was a fellow named Pruitt, a sort of half-official the county used for the ugly errands nobody with a real badge wanted their name on. And in the wagon, holding the reins, prim and certain and terrible, was a man in a black coat with a leather folio on his knee. The kind of man who does great harm and sleeps fine, because it was all filled out proper on the correct forms. "Morning," Pruitt said. He looked past me at the house where I could feel Nolly standing just inside the dark of the doorway with a child's hand in each of hers. "Understand you're harboring a runaway, Apache woman, left the agency road with 2 half-breed children back in March. There's an order." He nodded at the black coat, who was already leafing through his folio with damp fingers. "Signed. They're to be returned to the agency, all 3. And there it was. The whole weight of everything I'd been raised to be, and everything the country around me believed, and the law itself, all of it, sitting in my yard in the spring sunshine with a signed order and 3 armed men, come to take a woman and 2 children back to a place I knew for a fact would kill them slow. I felt my mouth go dry. I felt my own heart doing the coward's trick again, turning fear to anger, anger to the awful reasonable voice that says it's the law, Silas, what can one man do? It was never going to last, you knew that, you told her one night. And then behind me, from the dark of the doorway, I heard a small sound. Kai, 3 years old, his mother's hand tight in his. And he'd seen the men and he'd understood. Children always understand. We lie to ourselves that they don't. And he made a small sound, not a cry. He'd had crying frightened out of him long ago, just a small sound. The sound of a boy who has finally, after 3 weeks of storm and cold and a road that led nowhere, found one warm, safe place in the whole wide world, and is watching men ride up to take it away. I have told you I was a coward that morning with Ezra. I have not dressed up my failings in this telling, and I won't start now. But there are 2 kinds of moments in a life. There are the ones where being good is easy, costs nothing, and any man can manage it. And there are the ones where the door is heavy, and the wind is against you, and every reasonable voice you own is telling you to let it swing shut. And it's only in the second kind that you find out what you actually are. I heard that boy make that sound, and I stepped down off my own porch, and I put myself between those men and my front door, and I heard my own voice come out of me steadier than I had any right to expect, saying. That's what I heard myself say, steady, almost easy, like I asked hard men to show me paper every day of the week. The black coat looked up, surprised to be spoken to like a man instead of an authority. "The order is properly executed," he said. "It requires no name but the woman's." I didn't ask was it proper. I asked whose name signs it. I came down another step, slow, hands loose and open at my sides where everyone could see them, because a man with open hands is harder to shoot, and I wanted very much not to be shot in front of those children. Because I know most every name that means anything in this county, and I'd like to know which of them I'll be having a conversation with about the 3 armed men they sent onto my land. It bought me nothing but a few seconds, but sometimes a few seconds is the whole of what you've got, and you spend it, and you pray it's enough. Pruitt shifted in his saddle. "Silas, don't make this hard. Nobody wants trouble with you. Hand the squaw and her whelps over and we're gone and it's forgotten. You go back to your ranch. Nobody has to know you had any part in." "Say that word again in my yard," I said, and I did not raise my voice, and that was somehow worse. I could see it land. "And find out what kind of a morning you're going to have." The 2 hired men went still in that particular way that men go still when they're deciding whether to reach for iron. I felt the whole yard tighten like a girth. Boone had come up beside me, hackles like a saw blade down his old spine, a low grind going in his chest. From the doorway, silence. Nolly, holding her children in the dark, holding still, holding on, the way she'd held on for 300 miles. And I understood in that stretched-out second that I could not win this. That's the part they leave out of the stories, the ones where the good man faces down the mob and they slink away. I was one man. There were 3 of them and the law behind them and the whole weight of the age I lived in behind that. If it came to shooting, I'd kill one maybe and they'd kill me, and then they'd take her anyway. And the last thing those children would carry out of the one safe place they'd found would be the sight of me dead in the dirt for nothing. Heroics would get everyone I loved killed. I'd learned enough arithmetic in my life to add that sum, and it came out the same every way I ran it. So I did the other thing, the harder thing, the thing that doesn't make a good story but keeps children alive, which I have come to think is worth more than any story. I lied, fast and better than I've ever lied before or since. "That order's for a runaway from the agency," I said. "Woman that left the road in March, that right?" "That's right," said the black coat. "Then you've rode a long way for nothing, and I'm sorry for your trouble, but the woman in my house isn't your runaway." I said it flat and certain, the way you say a true thing. "The woman in my house is my wife's cousin's girl out of the Pima villages down south, come up to keep house since my Della passed. Christian, baptized. Got her papers from the mission at San Xavier if you care to ride the 3 days down there and roust the priest to check. Different woman entirely, different people. Your runaway's not here and never was, and if you take that one off my land you'll be answering to the mission and the diocese and every soul that knows I don't lie. Which is every soul in this county. Ask any of 'em. Ask Ezra Coombs. Ask the parson. Ask the man at the bank who's held my note 20 years and'll tell you Silas Reed's word is the one thing in this valley you can set your watch by. It was a wall of words and not one of them true, and I built it fast as I could, and I put every ounce of the reputation I'd spent 40 years earning behind it, all of it, cashed in at once, and I watched it land. Because here is the thing about a place where a man's word is currency. It cuts both ways. It had made my life narrow and lonely, all that being known. But it made me in that one moment expensive to call a liar. The black coat did not know me, but Pruitt did. And Pruitt knew that if Silas Reed said a thing in that flat, certain voice, then calling him a liar in front of witnesses was a debt that would come due, and he did not want to be holding that note. I saw him do the arithmetic, too. "You'll swear to that?" Pruitt said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'll swear it to God, the parson, and the territorial court, and I'll pay the priest's coach fare down to San Xavier my own self, if that's what it takes to send you gentlemen home satisfied," I said. "Now, you want to sit here calling a man a liar in his own yard over a housekeeper, or you want coffee for the road?" Because it's one or the other, and I'd truly rather it was coffee. The whole yard hung on a nail. Then the black coat closed his folio with a small, disgusted snap. A man who'd come a long way and hated to leave with a blank line where a completed errand should be, but hated worse the thought of a mission and a diocese and a lawsuit over a paper that, when he looked at it honest, had no name on it but Apache woman, 2 children, which described half the sorrow in the territory. "There has plainly been an error," he said stiffly, to no one to the record. "Pruitt. We've the actual runaway to find yet. We're wasting the morning." Pruitt looked at me one more moment. And I'll say this for him, there was something in his face right at the end that I've wondered about ever since. Not quite an apology, closer to a man glad in some buried part of himself to be given a reason not to do the thing he'd been sent to do. He touched his hat. "Silas!" And he turned his horse. They rode out the way they'd come, the dust going gold in the late morning light. And I stood in my yard and did not move and did not breathe until the last of them dropped below the ridge and the sound of them was gone, and it was only birds again, and the wind, and the creak of the wash line. Then my legs went, and I sat down hard on my own porch step, and I put my face in my two shaking hands, and I stayed like that a while. I felt her sit down beside me before I heard her. The children stayed in the doorway. I could feel them there watching, the way they watched everything, deciding. Boone had gone to them and was leaning his old body against Kai's legs, and the boy had one hand knotted in the loose skin of the dog's neck the way, that first night, he'd knotted it in his sister's dress. Nolly didn't say anything for a long time. Neither did I. There was too much, and none of it would go into words, and we both knew it, the way we'd come to know a lot of things without words. Finally she said, very quietly, "You should not have lied for us." I lowered my hands. "I know it. They will find the true papers do not exist. They may come back." "They might. You have spent your name. The thing you told me was the last thing you owned." She was looking out at the ridge where the dust had gone. "You spent it on a woman who came for one night's work." And I turned and looked at her, at this woman who had walked 300 miles on a sum that would never balance, who had refused to let the world close her children's book early, who had rehung my gate and mended my grief and taught me that goodness is only ever the door, and I found I was, of all the fool things, almost smiling. "Nolly," I said, "I have spent my whole life keeping careful accounts. Every debt, every favor, every red cent, all of it in the book, all of it balanced, all of it safe." I nodded out at the empty road. "And I have just now, this morning, finally understood the one thing the book could never teach me, which is that there are some things you're supposed to spend. That's what they're for. A name you never spend on anything, but keeping it isn't worth having. It's just a number in a book that dies when you do." I looked at her. "I'd rather have spent it on you three than saved it for my headstone. That's not a sacrifice. That's the best trade I ever made in my life, and I've made some good ones, ask anyone." She looked at me a long moment. And then Nolly, who I had never once seen cry, not that first night in the storm, not through all the telling of everything the world had done to her, Nolly put her face down against her own knees there on my porch step in the spring morning, and her shoulders shook once, twice, silent. And I did the only true kindness I'd ever learned how to do. I looked away. I gave her the gift of being unlooked at. I turned my face to the ridge and let her grieve and let her be relieved and let her be whatever she needed to be in that moment, in private, the way she'd let me be it 100 times. After a while her hand found mine on the step between us, just for a moment, rough from 300 miles of other people's chores, warm. Then she took it back and wiped her face and stood and became again the woman who would rather work than be a guest. "The children have not eaten," she said, "and you are shaking. Come inside, I will make coffee." "It's your coffee now," I said. "It was always going to be better than mine." They stayed. I could tell you it was simple after that. It wasn't. Ezra never came up my road easy again, and there were folks in town who crossed the street. And once, a year on, some drunk fool put a rock through my window in the dark with a word scratched on it. And I never did find out who, and it's just as well, because I'd have done something I'd have had to answer for. But they stayed. We were careful. Nolly became, for the world that needed to be lied to, my late wife's cousin's girl from the Pima villages, and I paid the priest at San Xavier a real visit and made a real and generous donation to a mission I'd never set foot in. And Father Alvarez, who was a good man and no fool and understood exactly what I was buying and why, made sure that if anyone ever rode down to check, there'd be a paper and a memory to meet them. The territory had a great appetite for cruelty in those years, but it ran on paperwork, same as everything, and paperwork can be answered with paperwork. And a lie kept steady long enough grows roots and becomes a kind of truth, which is a terrible thing, and also sometimes the thing that saves a life. The twins grew. Lord, how they grew. Dolly got tall and fierce and could ride anything with hair on it by the time she was 7, and Boone lived long enough just to see her do it, and died in the sun on the porch one winter afternoon with her hand on his side, which is a better death than most of us will get. Kai stayed serious. Kai kept accounts, same as his mother, same as me, And when he was old enough, I gave him the ranch's real ledger to keep, and he kept it better than I ever had. And I'd catch him some evenings frowning over the columns by lamplight, and I'd think, there's my boy. I did think that. I let myself think it. It took me a few years to let myself, but I got there. I never spoke aloud the thing that Nolly and I were to each other, and neither did she, and I'll not spell it out here either, because some things belong to the two people who lived them, and the reader can trust his own heart to know what a man means when he says a woman shared his roof, and his grief, and his porch step in the evenings for the rest of both their lives. There are words for it, and we had the sense not to need them. It was the truest thing I ever had. That's as much as I'll say, that's as much as it's anyone's to know. Della's on the hill behind the barn, and the boy Thomas beside her, and I go up there still, and I tell them things, and I have never once felt that they begrudged me the second life that came knocking on the worst night of a bad year and refused to be sent back into the storm. I think the dead want us to keep living. I think that's the whole of what they want. I think grief that refuses to let you love again isn't loyalty, it's just another closed door, and I'd spent enough of my life behind those. Nolly was right at the last about all of it. Being good is not a thing you're born. It's the door. Every time, it's only ever the door. I opened mine on a night I nearly didn't, to a woman I'd been raised to fear, because a boy made a small sound in the dark, and a mother sang 2 notes to hold her children on the far side of sleep. And it saved 4 lives and an old dog, and 3 of the 4 were mine, though it took me the longest time to understand that I'd been the one on the porch in the storm all along, knocking on a life I couldn't get back into, and she was the one who.